It was the early 2010s. That sounds so weird to say. And Magic Design was faced with a problem. Most colors had been showing up in decks, and with a range of deck diversity. Blue could be a more aggressive tempo color, or a controlling one with a grip full of cards. Green could play some early game beats, or ramp up for the long game. This was important not just for Standard, but because this little way to play called Commander was starting to pick up steam as its first products were coming out, a format which really wanted you to play a long game. But there was a color that was a problem. Despite having big top-end plays, it was short on card advantage. As a monocolor, only the aggressive strategies were really working. Getting the long game strategies to work was going to be a problem, without ways to refuel and hit your land drops, and it tended to only be used as the support color in those decks. If this sounds familiar, that's probably because the last few years have had this exact same discussion around white. But a bit over a decade ago, it wasn't white players were clamoring for us to fix. It was red. Good morning, Magic. I'm Gavin Verhey from Wizards of the Coast. And the issue of red card advantage was one of the biggest discussion points when I joined Wizards 12 years ago. In fact, in one of my job interviews, I was asked how I would try and fix this problem with red. It was a color with sweet big creatures and board sweepers, but without any form of card draw of its own. And so a lot of those cards didn't have homes. Today, let me tell you about the journey we went on, and are still going on, to fix that. And to do it, let's flash back to designing Innistrad block. Okay, so the design challenge is this. You need to give a color a tool. However, it needs to do it in a way that feels like the color. Take divination, for example. This is very blue in philosophy. Blue, a color about planning and patience, wants to be the best at the long game. So it should get the most efficient, no holds barred card draw. Red, on the other hand, is the opposite. It's the color of speed and passion and impatience. How are you supposed to give a color with those philosophies card draw? The game design team did a lot of discussion and came up with their first solution: looting. Traditionally only blue, this could be red now. Drawing and discarding felt like the kind of reckless thing red would do to draw cards. Let me find what I need right now and throw some other things away. And so, Faithless Looting was born, the first card to kick off this initiative. It also used flashback, so it gave you an extra use, an additional long game play for the deck. Now, Faithless Looting is an extremely powerful card, still seeing play in many places today. But how did it do as a way to fix the problem? Not great. A couple of reasons why. The first is that one cast of Faithless Looting actually puts you net down on cards. One card to use it, plus drawing 2 and discarding 2 is a net result of -1 card. So it was really more card selection than draw. And granted, it's not like we didn't realize that at the time, but we thought this kind of card selection might still find a home in some longer game decks. But it didn't really. The other is that it felt weird and not quite red to just take this straight from blue. It still felt a little too planny. So while Faithless Looting sees a lot of play, it's kind of an oddball, the product of a false start. I wouldn't expect to see much red card selection like that these days. And that's because the next go around, we tried a different path. And this one did stick. Something we first see on Wild Guess in Magic 2013, which will always live in my heart under its playtest name, Spin the Wheel. This fixes those two problems. First of all, it maintains card parity. You spend Wild Guess and another card to draw 2 cards. You remain card neutral, but get to dig deeper to find what you want. Second of all, you discard first before you draw. This simple tweak on looting makes a big difference to feel more red and helps differentiate between blue and red looting. So, how did Wild Guess do? Well, the card itself didn't do great. In part, I actually take some responsibility here. I really pushed M13 designer Zach Hill to have it move to double red from a red and a colorless, so it would be harder to play alongside Unburial Rites. That ultimately was too much and kicked it out from a lot of play. But the design shape has borne out over time. To skip ahead a bit, Tormenting Voice eventually gave us the 1 and a red version, and Thrill of Possibility brought it up to instant speed. Both of those cards have been reprinted many times now, and inspired more intricate, rare designs. This kind of card draw is firmly entrenched in red now. Red can do this for any number of cards, as long as it doesn't put you up cards. One of my favorite subtle things about this kind of card draw in red, by the way, is that it works great with copy effects. Once you pay the additional cost, you can copy the spell with something like Double Vision, and you will just end up a huge chunk of cards. You don't have to pay the cost again. A fun way to make it work in mono red. Okay, so to go back to around that time, This new form of discard then draw was codified into red. In the same set as Wild Guess, Magic 2013, Rummaging Goblin showed up as red's form of looter and gave the ability the nickname Rummaging. And that card has been iterated on many times since. We had done it. We had found a successful path. Kind of. These kinds of cards are all fine and good. But if you'll notice, we still didn't solve the problem. Yes, we gave red a way of card selection, and one that could often generate virtual card advantage by trading in excess lands or early game cards for new cards. If this was going to work, we would actually need to find a way to give red card advantage, a way to trade one card for two or more. We started looking back at old effects and things we could move around, and found something we hadn't really done, inspired by, of all cards, Elkin Bottle. It exiled your top card and let you play it for a duration. Card draw that was locked by time certainly felt red. Give me cards, but I need to use them right now. We pioneered this with Prophetic Flamespeaker in Journey into Nyx, a mythic rare with this effect. It probably wouldn't be mythic these days, but it was a really novel effect at the time. That's not much of a control card though. I feel like where we really made our first stab here was in Magic 2014 with Chandra, Pyromaster. It let you flip your top card and play it this turn, and you could do it over and over as long as Chandra was still around. We thought this was going to be stronger than it turned out to be in the real world, but it was on the right track. We started calling it bottling internally after Elkin Bottle. Some people called it impulsive draw. I tried to get Chandra to stick, but alas. What do you call it? I feel like people never settled on anything here. Anyway, okay, so those were permanents. But how about spells? Where was red's form of divination? Well, we tried Act on Impulse in Magic 2015. It exiled 3 cards for 3 mana with a duration of this turn. And while that card ended up being a long way off from being playable, asking for more mana after spending 3 is a tall order, it looked to have promise. So we began iterating. More on that in a moment. The first card where I feel like we really nailed this effect was Outpost Siege in Fate Reforged. 4 mana, but couldn't be attacked, like Chandra. It was a repeated source of card advantage, but you couldn't stockpile the cards. So, red. Outpost Siege played great and did accomplish our goals. And indeed, it inspired several longer game red decks, and other cards like it in the future. In Commander, cards like this see plenty of play, and I love the gameplay of them. They ask you to play cards you might not normally cast because you only have them right now, which leads to some interesting decisions and atypical plays. The one place we iterated on a lot and are still working on a decade later, outside of rate, is duration, and that's been the key to getting the spells to work. Act on Impulse was just this turn. That runs into a lot of trouble with doing things afterward. When Commune with Lava pioneered lasting through your next turn, it made a lot of sense for an X spell, given you want to sink all your mana into it. We started trying that other places, and it's shown up all over, and plenty of commander tables on Prosper. This is clearly a hit. Most recently, we picked up a new trick in our toolbox in Streets of New Capenna with Unlucky Witness. Setting the duration to your next end step means if it dies on your opponent's turn, you get it until your end step. But if your opponent kills it in your end step, they can't deny you the cards. They'll stick around to your next turn. A very clever way to thread the needle here. And we've certainly come a long way from Act on Impulse. The newest entry into this journey is Ren's Resolve from March of the Machine. 2 mana for 2 cards, and they last through the end of your next turn. We've come a long way from 3 mana for 3 cards this turn. So, what of this in the future? Well, we're going to keep doing it. Clearly it's working. But there is one problem. As we've found all these slightly different timing windows, it adds a lot of complexity. Which cards last through your next turn? Which ones go until your end step? Anybody who's ever played a Prosper deck knows that there can be a lot to process. I've even seen people with a Prosper playmat that clearly demarcates their must play this turn and can wait until next turn piles, for when you generate a lot of these at once. For ease of play and complexity, we don't want to do too many different kinds in a single set. On repeated abilities on permanents, we lean toward just this turn. Whereas on one-shot abilities and spells, we lean toward through your next turn, so you have mana to cast them. After 12 years and a lot of iteration, we're at a point now where many players have never known a game without these kinds of red effects. Much like how White has been evolving a lot in the past couple years with new kinds of mana ramp and card draw, a decade from now, those problems will likely seem a distant memory as we look back on them like this, with both false starts and successes. And I'm sure there will be something new we're trying to fix as some unexpected design concern has impacted the Magic landscape. And that's part of the beauty of this wonderful, ever-evolving game. What do you think of these solutions? Is there a red card you like for this the most? How do you feel about how we're tackling White right now? Let me know in the comments down below. I'll talk with you again soon, and until then, may you draw just the card you need. You got this. You could pay a cost and discard them to create a token land and put it onto the battlefield. It counted as your land play for the turn, and the token made colorless mana. This helped make sure you could hit your land drops while giving you flexibility. There were a few problems with this idea. How would the rules handle the idea of spending a land drop? Was this really the place to do Magic's first non-creature